Alright, so with any discourse surrounding, which console is quote-unquote superior, there's bound to be some contention. I understand that there are people out there who want to support a specific console as if it were a sports team or something. I personally really don't give that much of a damn. For me, the superior console is the one with the best games, and honestly, I'm excited to see what both consoles have in store. They both seem pretty powerful, like they both will produce some substantial upgrades in visual fidelity and game design in many respects, and I'm just excited to see what next gen will bring forth in terms of game experiences, and I wish both companies the best. As far as PS5 goes, I want to discuss some of the things that developers have been saying about that console. There's been a lot of praise being given to PlayStation 5. Now, I'm going to show you some quotes from developers who are more associated with Sony. They have an opinion, they have a lot of praise to give, but I understand some of you might look at that and go, well, they are working on PlayStation titles, or they've worked a lot on PlayStation titles, or are with Sony, so maybe they're biased. But then there are other developers who are outside the confines of Sony, who are third-party developers who have also been singing praises about PlayStation 5 and talking about how big of a leap it is in certain respects. Again, this is what devs are saying, and I don't know enough about hardware to be able to say one way or the other. I'm just going to relay what some of these people are saying. And so let's begin with Kurt Margino. He is a co-game director on The Last of Us Part 2. So he's with Naughty Dog, and so he is very much with Sony. And on PS5, he had this to say back in March 18th, 2020. He said, "Still tripping about this PS5 solid-state drive spec. Like, people don't even know how big of a leap in terms of game design can be made, especially for first-party that doesn't have to design to lowest common denominator. By far the biggest leap in my career. Can't wait." And then he added, "Obligatory, no, I'm not hinting at anything Naughty Dog is working on, just speculating based on those numbers." So when it comes to lowest common denominator, he's referring to the fact that if there's a multi-platform game, they have to design around the fact that, there might be people with PCs who only have regular hard drives rather than solid state drives, hard disks rather than solid state. And so that creates certain bottlenecks where they have to design to the lowest common denominator, whereas if you're designing a first-party title for PS5, every PS5 has that super fast SSD, and so the game can be, that exclusive game can be designed around that SSD because that piece of hardware is going to be commonplace across all PlayStation 5s. And so that allows for a sort of optimization and utilization of the full power of PlayStation 5 in a way that a multi-platform game that has to appeal to the lowest common denominator might not. Now let's move on to a tweet made by another developer, Andre Pacino from Ready at Dawn. For those who don't know, Ready at Dawn is the developer behind The Order 1886. This developer seems genuinely excited about the prospects of PlayStation 5's hardware and the architecture surrounding it. This individual said, "Dollar bet, within a year from its launch, gamers will fully appreciate that the PlayStation 5 is one of the most revolutionary, inspired home consoles ever designed, and will feel silly for having spent energy arguing about teraflops and other similarly misunderstood specs." So the conversation surrounding, Xbox Series X versus PS5 is teraflops, and the fact that Xbox Series X, just looking at the raw numbers, does have higher teraflops. And apparently, this individual is thinking that teraflops isn't really the number to worry about, but rather there's more to PlayStation 5's design that will become more apparent in terms of the advantages once the console launches and once games are designed around PS5's hardware. And so, yeah, he's arguing it's inspired, revolutionary. That's high praise to give to a console. And again, I cannot personally attest to any of this. And I think we'll have to wait and see when the games come out to see how much the developers take advantage of whatever it is about PS5's design that makes it so quote-unquote revolutionary. But it's worth noting that developers are seriously going out of their way to praise this console. Take that for what you will. Now, this next developer is a third-party dev. His name is Billy Khan, and he is lead engine programmer at id Software. id Software being the studio that worked on the Doom series, with their latest release being Doom Eternal, which is an awesome game, obviously, if you've played it. And here's what this individual had to say about PS5's hardware prior to Mark Cerny's presentation, the one that was supposed to be given at GDC but had to be postponed and turned into this live stream format. That was a bit awkward presentation-wise. But Billy Khan, prior to that presentation, said this: PS5 details will finally be made public tomorrow. My too long didn't read version, it's awesome. So he didn't go into full details, obviously, but there's something about this console that Billy Khan, who is the lead engine programmer, was just really excited about. He seems to think there's something special about something that PS5 does. And then to add on top of that, Jason Schreier, who is in contact with a number of industry sources, a number of developers who have been making games for PlayStation 5, he retweeted what Billy Khan said and then posted the following: I don't know how many teraflops LOL the PS5 has, but this is the sentiment I've heard from several technical-minded folks. One told me it was the most exciting hardware in 20 years. Will be fascinating to see how it stacks up to the impressive Xbox Series X specs. So this was expressed a day prior to Mark Cerny's PS5 hardware presentation, but a few days later, on March 21st, 2020, Jason Schreier took to his Kotaku Split Screen podcast, episode 222, to relay further details about what exactly he's heard from a number of developers who were seriously impressed with PlayStation 5's hardware, with some of its unique capabilities. And here's what Jason had to say on that front. Everybody is now seeing the spec sheet and they see PS5 10.2 teraflops and Xbox Series X 12 teraflops, but meanwhile, the people that I've been talking to over the past few months, over the past couple years, who are actually working on the PlayStation 5 have pretty much unanimously all said this thing is a beast. It is one of the coolest pieces of hardware that we have ever seen or used before. There are so many things here that are, there's that word again, revolutionary. The general consensus is that these things are both extremely powerful and both very similar in a lot of ways, both do different things in really cool ways. These are both extremely impressive pieces of technology, but because of the way Sony has actually presented and marketed this thing, now the narrative is that Xbox Series X is way more powerful than the PS5, and I think that is such a maybe fatal flaw on Sony's part for this console generation. Maybe it'll be forgotten if the PS5 comes in cheaper or has a killer launch lineup, but right now it's such a dropping the ball after so many years of smart decisions on Sony's part. What I'm hearing from the people who are actually working on these things, working on the metal, is that the Xbox Series X is not significantly more powerful than the PS5 despite its teraflops number. Sony has dropped the ball, and there's going to be like weeks and weeks, if not months and months, especially with the pandemic disrupting everything, of people just talking about how the Xbox Series X is the most powerful console and it's beating the PS5 in every single way. Meanwhile, I'm getting texts and DMs even today as this was going on from developers being like, this is such a shame. The PS5 is so superior in all these other ways that they're not actually able to message right now or talk about right now. I heard from at least 3 different people in the past couple hours since the Cerny talk being like, the PS5 is actually like the more superior piece of hardware in a lot of different ways, despite what you're seeing in these paper spec sheets. And so again, yes, plenty of room to talk about this for all of these companies to keep messaging and showing games, but I do think that Sony has really dropped the ball so far from what we have seen. So the perspective right now from just the pure teraflop numbers is, well, Xbox Series X is clearly better. Seemingly that's not the number to define how developers feel about these consoles and what makes PS5 particularly exciting to develop for. based on all of these rumblings, not just from first-party Sony studios, but also third-party studios and sources and developers. Jason Schreier, who we know is in touch with a lot of these industry insiders, has talked to. Now, this last quote is a bit strange in that it was eventually retracted by the developer. Hard to say if it was because of NDA reasons or something else. Basically, here's a Crytek developer who praised the PlayStation 5. Here's the original story by news outlet Push Square. The Persian Twitter user has taken it upon themselves to convert some choice quotes into English. Apparently, among the claims that he made include that, quote, PS5 is the easiest console they have ever coded on to reach its peak performance. And he also goes on to say that he thinks PS5 is extremely simple and has so many abilities that make the devs so free, and concludes by stating that the PlayStation 5, he flat out says, is a better console than Xbox Series X. Apparently that's the translation. Now, he even took it a step further by saying, after he was asked which of the two consoles he prefers to work with, that, quote, without a moment of hesitation, PlayStation 5. As a programmer, I say PS5 is much better, and I don't think you can find a programmer that could name one advantage that Xbox Series X has over PS5. Those are his words, at least. Now, this Crytek developer is a rendering engineer going by the name Ali Salehi. He did an interview with a Persian news outlet where he conveyed all of this information, and then a Persian Twitter user translated all of that. For some reason, the Persian news outlet pulled that interview with all those details for quote-unquote personal reasons, and then the tweets were pulled as well, the translation tweets, but they are still archived on the internet. And here's a WCCF Tech article that details the archived article as well as the translation from the Twitter user. And here are more specific details mentioned by this Crytek developer. Take it for what you will. So this reads, that's why you can't care much about these numbers, but if all parts can work efficiently in Xbox Series X alongside its GPU, it can hit that number in practice, the 12 teraflops, which doesn't seem so possible. Beside all these, there's a software part too. And then scrolling down further, he adds that the thing we saw in PCs was DirectX 12 and Vulkan. Without change in hardware, with change in the architecture of the software, you can use the hardware better. This is applicable to the consoles too. Sony runs PS5 on its own OS, but Microsoft uses a custom version of Windows. Because the total amount of things we want to put in the fast part is so much that it may cause problems. And if we want to support 4K, it will be another whole story. So there will be some things that will hold the GPU off. Therefore, despite the huge difference in CU count, they don't have that much of teraflops difference. An interesting thing that one of the IGN's journalists said. He said Xbox Series X is like a V8 motor and PS5 is like a V6 motor, one turbo boosted to the max for best efficiency. And then this series of tweets finishes off with, this will make the console work mostly on the 10.28 teraflops, referring to the PS5. But in Xbox Series X, since the other parts of the GPU work slower due to the lower clock speed, it actually works a lot at lower teraflops most often and reaches 12 only at ideal situations. So that's a pretty detailed breakdown, assuming that what he's saying is indeed true. And this is consistent with what Jason Schreier is saying about how there are developers who are really excited about PS5 and saying that it's the more superior piece of hardware in a lot of different ways, despite what you're seeing in these paper spec sheets. In other words, the feedback surrounding PS5 is consistent and that teraflop numbers aren't everything. Now, keep in mind, this is not me trying to cheerlead for PlayStation 5. Again, I ultimately don't care about, which is the superior console as long as we get great games. That's where I'm leaning more towards. But the feedback surrounding PlayStation 5, what the devs are saying, I think that's some interesting insight there. And the feedback surrounding PS5 seems to be, again, pretty consistent. There just seems to be something about PS5's architecture and that solid-state drive and the paradigms that opens up in terms of game design that has developers really hyped up. I'm not a developer, so again, I can't say one way or the other whether what they're saying is true or not. But ultimately, I think the games will decide which console comes out on top. In the most ideal scenario, both consoles will be churning out incredible games left and right, and both will be extensively played by all kinds of gamers alike. That's the ideal scenario. If we get good games, then everyone wins. So that's my take, ladies and gentlemen, and this is what developers are saying about PlayStation 5. And it's just exciting times to be a gamer. It's an exciting time to anticipate the next-gen console, and I'm just excited for the future of video games and to cover all of that for you guys. So with that, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on Dev's statement surrounding PlayStation 5, all the praise that's being given to the console and its hardware and its architecture, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.